He was running for his life. Zombies were everywhere. Today, he's already beaten multiple apocalypses. The system chose him and gave him a hidden rank ability, something far more broken. A doomsday simulation. He enters worlds that don't exist yet, and every time, he dies. Again and again. But here's the truth. Death is just training. Every death makes him 1,000 times stronger. Every simulation gives him power that shouldn't exist. While others fight to survive one world, he clears entire apocalypses before they even begin. The world starts fearing him, even the system, because something is very wrong. And now, he's not entering simulations to survive anymore. He's entering them to become the last thing any world wants to face, wants to core. A violent kick slammed against the door. The wood nearly shattered under the force. Zane Voss jumped out of bed. Curses died in his throat. He looked through the peephole. The blood in his veins froze solid. A man stood there. His skin was deathly pale. Blue veins crawled across his face like parasites. He was banging his head against the door, over and over, like a mindless predator. This wasn't a dream. Zane checked. He counted his fingers. He read a book. Everything was too clear, too real. Years ago, he transmigrated to this world, Terra. He lived a quiet life, an orphan, a nobody with no special powers. But today, the normal world finally broke. Zane didn't panic. He reached under his bed. He pulled out a heavy metal crowbar. He gripped it until his knuckles turned white. His roommates, likely dead, or worse, turned. There was no time for sentiment. He prepared to scout the hallway. Then, it happened. A translucent blue screen flickered into existence. A cold, deranged voice echoed in his mind. The world was getting an update. The era of apocalypse had begun. For the first month, Terra had drawn the zombie theme. The voice was mocking, cruel. It claimed those who died instantly were just imperfect, unfit to survive. Zane didn't care. He was alone in this world anyway. Suddenly, a second notification flashed. To facilitate evolution, every survivor was granted a talent. For most, it was a gamble of luck. But for Zane, the air shifted. A unique high-ranking alert drowned out everything else. The rank innate talent, Doomsday Hive Simulator, has awakened. The system offered him a choice, a power he could control. Outside, the world descended into a choir of screams. The sound of tearing flesh filled the air. Zane looked at the glowing interface. The prompt was simple, yet it changed everything. Do you want to start a Doomsday Life simulation? Zane tightened his grip on the crowbar. The game of survival just began, and he just got the ultimate cheat code. Zane didn't waste time. In a world where neighbors become monsters, speed is the only edge. He spoke to the system with his thoughts, hiding his secret from the chaos outside. The Doomsday Life Simulator wasn't a game. It was a factory for power, a way to farm skills and experience from the future, to dominate the present. The goal was simple: survive as long as possible, claim the highest rewards. The system presented 4 paths to destruction: a dying sun, a machine uprising, an acid rain wasteland, or a world drowned by a global ocean. Zane's eyes narrowed. The sun and the machines were death sentences, endless suffering. But the global ocean survival was different, a world of 99% water. Everyone starts on a raft, fighting for scraps of land. That was the choice. But to survive, he needed the right tools. 6 talents appeared before him, glowing with different rarities. He ignored the white grades immediately. Useless skills, basic swimming, racial privilege, trash. His eyes locked onto the higher tiers: unlimited food creation, gold rank, an absolute necessity, infinite food, 0 energy cost, peak culinary quality. Next, the absolute compass, orange rank, a soul-bound tool that points toward anything he desires. In a vast, empty ocean, this was a sod-tier item. For his final slot, he made a choice. He bypassed the Swordmaster talent. He chose water breathing, blue rank. In a world made of water, the ability to breathe beneath the waves is the ultimate insurance. The loadout was locked in. Zane gave the command. It was time to simulate. The moment Zane opened his eyes, the world changed. The time stop lifted, replaced by a blinding sun and a sky so clear it felt artificial. He wasn't in his dorm anymore. He was drifting on a small, uncomfortable wooden raft. In the middle of a vast, endless ocean. No land, no trees, just blue in every direction. Suddenly, the system's voice echoed. This was the Global Ocean Survival Update. The world had expanded, drowning the old Earth to make way for something deadlier. Zane realized the stakes immediately. These simulations weren't just games. They were training for future updates in the real world. To survive here was to master the future. He didn't wait for a miracle. He tested his power. He dove straight into the deep blue. The moment the salt water hit his lungs, there was no pain, only a cool, liquid oxygen. It felt as natural as air. He could breathe. He was no longer a victim of the sea. He was a part of it. Back on the raft, he waved his hand. A cold bottle of water appeared out of thin air, followed by a steaming beefsteak on a porcelain plate. It wasn't just food. The talent created the utensils, the plates, everything. With a thought, he could make the waste vanish. In a world of scarcity, Zane was a god of resources, but the ocean wasn't empty. A regional chat flickered to life. Out of 100,000 people, 4 were already dead. Among the panicked messages, one caught his eye. A survivor named King mentioned something that changed everything. Fairy fruits, unique treasures that held the key to true power in this drowned world. Zane gripped his compass. The hunt was on. The chat was exploding with messages, but one user named King stood out. He wasn't just panicking, he was sharing intel. He talked about fairy fruits, the ultimate power-ups of this world. He urged everyone to eat them immediately if found. Zane watched from the safety of his simulation. He smirked. This King guy was smart, but he was missing the big picture. Global ocean survival was just a playground, compared to the true horrors the system could throw at them. Zane didn't believe in being a hero. He believed in being prepared. He resumed the simulation, feeling the salt spray on his skin and the sin's heat. Free experience, without the real-world risk. He watched as others found resource chests, or begged for food in the chat. Zane could have fed them all with a wave of his hand, but he wasn't a saint. He wasn't going to paint a target on his back. Revealing a golden talent to 100,000 strangers is suicide. Instead, he made a move. He messaged King privately, an offer of a steady supply of high-quality food in exchange for exclusive, unfiltered info. The deal was struck. King wasn't as selfless as he seemed. He'd been holding back the real details. He revealed the 3 categories of fruits: sprite fruits for elemental control, fey fruits for physical transformations, and charm fruits for unique abilities. With the intel secured, it was time to stop drifting. It was time to start hunting. Zane summoned his absolute compass. The golden device hovered over his palm, its needle trembling with potential. He didn't just want any fruit, he wanted the best. He focused his intent, his voice cold and determined. Point me to the strongest, most suitable fairy fruit in this ocean. The needle spun wildly. Then, it locked onto a single direction. The real game had just begun. The golden needle of the compass spun rapidly. It locked toward the northeast. Zane didn't know the exact distance, but he finally had a clear direction to navigate, while other survivors drifted aimlessly. He possessed the coordinates to a powerful fairy fruit. He grabbed his oars and began rowing, but the lightweight raft struggled. The relentless ocean waves pushed back. Progress was agonizingly slow. An immediate upgrade was now his top priority. He needed 20 pieces of driftwood to reach level 2, yet not a single island was in sight. Instead of searching, Zane decided to exploit his gold-grade talent to its full potential. He opened the regional trade market. He began creating fresh meals and bottled water out of thin air. He listed the food for trade. His price? Raft upgrade materials only. The regional chat went silent for a split second. Then, it exploded into total chaos. Messages flooded in. Thousands of survivors realized the truth. Someone controlled the most vital resource in this new world. Some were awestruck. Others tried to manipulate him with sob stories or religious guilt. Zane didn't flinch. He blocked the moral blackmailers. He focused strictly on the trades. Within 15 minutes, the system report arrived. The numbers were staggering. He had acquired tens of thousands of materials. Common, uncommon, it didn't matter. The power of controlling the food supply was absolute. Zane immediately initiated the upgrade. He used the driftwood he had just earned. The raft beneath his feet began to glow. It vibrated with intense energy. Loose planks tightened. Gaps closed. Reinforced beams slid into place with mechanical precision. Heavy ropes lashed the frame together. Sealed barrels settled underneath for better buoyancy. When the transformation stopped, the structure felt solid, impenetrable. In less than an hour, his flimsy float had become a level 2 reinforced raft. This was only the beginning of his dominance, and the compass was still pointing toward his ultimate prize. The reinforced raft was just the beginning, but Zane knew he wasn't alone. Lucky chests and early resource drops meant others were catching up. To stay ahead, he had to push further. He checked the requirements for a level 3 small boat: hardwood, reinforced rope, metal fasteners. Using his survivor authority, Zane bypassed the rules. No furnace, no workbench. In a flash of light, the flat deck began to curve. It formed a proper hull. A keel extended below. A rudder slid into place. The side planks rose to waist height. It was no longer a raft. It was a vessel built for the deep ocean. 8 days passed in a blur of rowing and relentless sun. The world was becoming a graveyard. The survivor count plummeted from 100,000 to just 77,000. Thousands had been swallowed by storms, whirlpools, predators. While the desperate tried to blackmail him for food, Zane remained cold. He traded only with those who had value, like an old sailor who taught him the secrets of the sea. Zane wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was a captain. During his voyage, the first legends of the fairy fruits emerged. King messaged him privately. He had consumed the water sprite fruit. He could control the tides. He could turn his body into intangible liquid. Others were gaining power, but none could match Zane's progression. By trading his endless food for every scrap of metal and timber, he pushed his craft even further. Level 4, the advanced small boat. Only a lack of rare materials stood in his way. The path to a massive level 5 medium ship was almost clear. Then, on the horizon, the blue monotony finally broke. A speck of green appeared. The needle of the absolute compass locked onto it. It quivered with violence. The island, the home of the strongest, most suitable fairy fruit for his soul. Zane gripped the rudder. His eyes burned with anticipation. The long wait was over. The true evolution was about to begin. Zane wasted no time. As his boat reached the shore of the deserted island, he jumped onto the sand. He gripped a sharp steel machete. His preparation had paid off. He wasn't using basic tools anymore. He had level 3 enchanted oars. Cutting through the water 30% faster. He moved through the waist-high grass with caution. The steel blade cleared his path. After 15 minutes, he finally saw it. A massive tree, bearing strange fruits that looked like a cross between pears and apples. But one fruit was different. It didn't look organic. It had a dull metallic sheen. Its skin was etched with natural, coiling chain patterns. It felt heavy, radiating a presence that forced the other fruits to grow away from it. This was the one. The absolute compass had led him to the most compatible power for his soul. Zane didn't risk climbing the towering tree. He pulled out a bow. After several misses, he finally clipped the stem. The fruit tumbled through the air. Zane caught it before it could hit the dirt. Without a second's hesitation, he took a bite. It wasn't a nightmare. It was sweet and tangy, but it had a sharp metallic aftertaste, like the faint tang of iron. He finished every bit, from the skin to the stem, almost instantly. A surge of power reshaped his very being, an instinctual awakening. He now possessed the charm-type metal chain fruit. Zane stood on the quiet beach, testing his new strength. He could create and manipulate heavy metal chains at will, along with a secondary ability, to control metal itself. It wasn't the elemental intangibility he had initially hoped for, but he trusted his compass. This wasn't just a tool. It was a weapon of absolute control. He had reclaimed his lead in the race for power, and with his metal-clad soul, the ocean was about to learn his name. Zane stood on the island, feeling the weight of a power he hadn't yet mastered. For this simulation to be worth it, he had to bring a weapon back to the real world, something to tear through the zombies waiting outside his dorm. He extended his hand. Heavy metal chains materialized out of thin air, slithering around his arm like cold, loyal serpents. With a single thought, the chains lashed out. They wrapped around a high branch, hoisting him into the air. He pushed the power further. Thick chains erupted from his back, forming 8 massive spider-like appendages, lifting him 10 meters above the ground. From this height, the island was no longer a mystery. He could see everything: the dense jungle, the snakes, and a pack of wild boars. He didn't need their meat, but he needed a target. With a snap of his fingers, chains burst from the earth, binding the boars instantly, before they could even squeal. The tips of the chains sharpened into lethal spearheads, piercing their hides, seeking their hearts with predatory precision. In seconds, it was over. Zane retracted the chains. He felt a surge of confidence. He was no longer just a wealthy merchant. He was now one of the strongest survivors in the ocean. The Fairy Fruit Alliance had been hunting sea monsters for loot, and Zane had stayed on the sidelines as their supplier. But the time for hiding was over. He needed to master this instinct, to turn this new limb into a perfect weapon of war. But he wasn't satisfied with just one power. If this world had more to offer, he was going to take it all. He summoned his absolute compass. The golden needle trembled in his left hand. His voice was cold, his intent absolute. Find me the nearest location where I can gain power. Aside from fairy fruits, the hunt for the ultimate evolution had just moved to the next level. The golden needle of the absolute compass began to spin. Zane started probing the world's secrets. He asked to locate the One. The needle spun aimlessly. He searched for mermaids. It pointed west with absolute certainty. He realized the truth. Fairy fruits were unique and finite, but this world hid another path to strength. He commanded the compass to find a secondary power system. The needle locked toward the southeast. Zane didn't care if King was lying, or if he simply didn't know. Zane was already moving. He boarded his boat. He set a course that would last for 2 weeks. By the 22nd day of the apocalypse, his relentless trading finally paid off. He upgraded his vessel to a level 5 medium ship, a beast of wood and iron. He no longer needed to row. A marine engine rumbled to life beneath the deck. A proper cabin finally offered shelter from the freezing night winds. He integrated a rare autopilot module, slaving it to the absolute compass. The ship navigated itself while he trained his chains. While the Fairy Fruit Alliance suffered heavy casualties, hunting a 50-meter kraken, Zane ignored their screams for help. He knew their weakness. Their bodies were too fragile for the monsters of the deep. He was hunting for a way to strengthen his very flesh, to bridge that gap. As he neared a distant island, he pulled out his telescope. He expected to dock. He expected to search the land. Suddenly, the needle shifted violently. It wasn't pointing at the island anymore. It was pointing straight down. Zane stared at the dark, churning surface of the ocean. He realized his destination wasn't on land. His prize was buried deep underwater. Zane gazed at the dark water. His prize was buried in the abyss. He had the advantage of water breathing, but the crushing pressure of the deep and the shadows of gargantuan monsters made this a suicide mission. For a moment, he hesitated. In the real world, Zane paused the simulation. The system gave him the facts. He only gets 1 attempt per week, 4 shots a month to master the apocalypse. He couldn't afford to be reckless. He needed to maximize every second of this life. He made a cold, calculated decision. The underwater treasure could wait. There was no point in gaining a new power, if he hadn't even mastered the one he already had. He steered his level 5 ship toward the nearby island. He moored it securely. He didn't need a shelter. His ship was his fortress. He didn't need to hunt. His gold-tier talent made him a god of resources. On the sands of that deserted island, Zane began his true evolution. His chains were already extensions of his soul, capable of hardening, reshaping, striking with instinctive precision. But he knew the cost. Usage drained his mind and body. To survive the zombies of the real world and the monsters of the deep, he had to push his limits. Until using his powers was as natural as breathing, he was the ghost in the machine of this world. While others scrambled for scraps, Zane lived in luxury. His food talent made him a legend, even among the strongest alliances. He didn't need their respect, but he used their awe to stay undisturbed. He sat on the beach. The metal chains slithered around him like a protective cocoon. He set his resolve. He wasn't leaving this island for a long time. It was time for a 6-month training montage, a journey that would turn a survivor into a predator. The first month of training was a masterclass in efficiency. Zane transformed his chains, no longer clunky metal, but thin, unbreakable threads of steel. He could maintain them for hours without breaking a sweat. By the second month, his reach became legendary. He no longer needed a line of sight. His spatial awareness allowed him to anchor chains in midair, creating a web of control that defied gravity, but isolation had its limits. In the third month, Zane finally stepped out of the shadows. He joined the Fairy Fruit Alliance. King and the other survivors were silenced, terrified by Zane's progression. His chains didn't just bind, they suppressed. He wrapped them around a gorilla hybrid user, and the brute's strength simply vanished. Even King, in his intangible water form, felt a chilling disruption. By the fourth month, Zane achieved the impossible. His chains could now bind energy itself, snatching active abilities out of the air, holding elemental users like common prisoners. The metal was no longer just an object, it was his literal intent, manifested as a cage. By the fifth month, Zane was a god-tier predator. His chains carried a sealing property, paralyzing the very will to move. He tested it against a 100-meter-tall sea monster, a beast famous for near-instant regeneration. Under Zane's chains, its wounds refused to heal, its life force withered away. But as the seventh month approached, his rapid growth hit a brick wall. He had reached a bottleneck, something no amount of calm practice could break. Zane stood on the edge of his level 5 ship, looking down at the dark abyss. He knew what he needed, a near-death experience. Only the raw stress of a life-or-death struggle could force his power to evolve. Deep below, the entity was waiting, the guardian of the secondary power system, a creature so powerful, even the current Zane felt a shiver of true dread. He tightened his grip on his resolve. This was the ultimate gamble. If he won, he would become the undisputed king of this world. If he lost, the simulation would end in blood. It was time to dive. Zane stood at the edge of the abyss, ready to plunge into a nightmare. He didn't just dive, he transitioned. Countless chains erupted from his back, anchoring themselves into the very air. He maneuvered above the waves like a god of steel. With the deep-sea necklace active, he dove, 600 meters down. The crushing weight of the ocean felt like a gentle breeze. His 8-chain appendages stabbed through the water, dragging him deeper and faster than any creature of the deep. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a predator in a realm of giants. At 2,000 meters deep, the darkness moved. A massive presence approached. Zane didn't wait to see its face. He unleashed a storm of sharp-tipped chains, piercing its hide, drilling toward its heart like remote-controlled spears. But the creature, a gargantuan 400-meter-tall orca, let out a shriek that shattered the silence. The vibrations tore through Zane's eardrums. They turned his internal organs into a bloody mess. Pain flared. Death loomed. In that moment of absolute agony, something inside him snapped. The world went silent. When Zane opened his eyes, they glowed, a blinding icy blue light. Illusory fairy wings unfurled from his back. This wasn't just a power-up, it was a semi-awakening. He finally learned the truth. He didn't eat a simple chain fruit. He possessed the mythical hybrid type, Fairy King of Sealing, Valkras. With a wave of his hand, the lethal vibrations froze. He had gained the absolute power to seal anything. Movement, energy, life itself, now in his true fairy form. Zane flew through the deep, approaching the paralyzed orca. The massive beast, once capable of killing with a scream, was now a helpless statue of flesh. Zane pulled out his compass. The needle pointed directly at the monster's heart. The secret to the new power system wasn't on an island. It was inside the beast he had just conquered. Once the 400-meter-tall orca drew its last breath, Zane didn't hesitate. He felt the massive beast's essence integrate into his talent. Legendary sea monster dishes were added to his menu. With a wave of his hand, he manifested a storm of metal blades, dissecting the gargantuan carcass with surgical precision. Deep within its flesh, he found it, a massive white pearl, artificially implanted like a high-tech storage device. The absolute compass locked onto the pearl, but Zane could still feel the shadows. Ancient terrors were lurking in the abyss. He didn't linger. Flapping his golden fairy wings, he broke the surface. He returned to the safety of his level 6 battleship. While other survivors struggled to build ships for their crews, Zane had focused everything on a compact, lethal war machine. He was the only true fairy in the ocean, a mythical being standing leagues above the ordinary. The others were only beginning to understand their powers. Sitting in his cabin, Zane looked at the pearl. His innate knowledge told him the truth. Without a mythical fruit, no one else could ever reach the throne of a fairy king. But he wasn't satisfied with being a king of spirits. He wanted to be a god of flesh. He donned his metal gauntlets and crushed the pearl. A blinding white light erupted, lashing out like a solar flare. Zane stood his ground. He allowed the streak of light to pierce his forehead. In an instant, his consciousness was flooded. Ancient techniques, forbidden knowledge, the secrets of a secondary power system poured into his mind like a torrential storm. The gap between him and the rest of the world was no longer just a distance. It was an ocean. The blinding light faded, leaving Zane with a mind full of forbidden secrets. He finally understood the mystery, the Leviathan tempering path, created by mermaids to survive the abyss without fairy fruits. This system allowed a user to devour sea origin energy, ripping it from defeated monsters to force physical evolution. It wasn't about flashy energy attacks. It was about turning the human body into a living Leviathan. Zane analyzed the path with cold precision. It was divided into 5 brutal stages: tide tempering, current bone, abyss flesh, Leviathan frame, and finally, the abyss sovereign body. At the peak, a human could tear apart sea monsters over a kilometer long with their bare hands. There was a catch. The power was tied to the ocean, away from water. His strength would drop by an entire stage, but for Zane, the risk was worth it. His fairy fruit made him a god of sealing, but his flesh was still mortal. This was the missing piece of the puzzle. He realized a terrifying truth. Even in his true fairy form, his physical strength only rivaled the second stage of this path. To be truly invincible in the real world, where water was scarce and zombies roamed, he had to reach the 5th stage. Only then, even with the power drop, would he remain a 4th stage monster on land. The path was dangerous. The risk of mutating into a sea creature was high, but Zane only saw an opportunity. He looked at his level 6 battleship, then at the vast ocean full of energy, waiting to be plundered. The training montage was over. The slaughter was about to begin. To become a sovereign of the abyss, he would have to turn the ocean into his personal hunting ground. The knowledge from the pearl was clear. Devouring the raw flesh of sea monsters was the fastest way to power. But for a normal human, it was a one-way ticket to a grotesque mutation. Zane, however, was no longer normal. In his true fairy form, he could consume the raw flesh. He used his unlimited food creation talent and simply sealed any mutation before it took root. He was a biological cheat code, but just as he prepared to begin his evolution, the sky turned. The world will's voice boomed across the ocean. It delivered a sentence of death. The great filter. In 4 months, the half-population death would occur, a random, unavoidable purge. 50% of all survivors would simply cease to exist. It didn't matter how much power you had. It didn't matter how many monsters you killed. If your luck ran out, you were dead. The regional chat became a storm of fury and despair. The Fairy Fruit Alliance had bled and fought to reach the top. Now, they faced a 50-50 chance of being erased, like common weaklings. Zane felt a cold rage. This wasn't a challenge. It was a plot kill. He realized he was far from powerful enough to kill the world will. So, he chose the only path left: absolute, frenzied training. If he was going to die in 4 months, he would die as the most powerful being this world had ever seen. He consulted his absolute compass one last time, looking for a way to eat a second fairy fruit. But the needle remained frozen. There was no shortcut within his reach. Zane gripped his metal gauntlets, his eyes burning with an icy blue fire. He had 120 days. He would spend every second devouring leviathans, pushing his Valkyrie sealing powers to the absolute limit. The great filter was coming for him, but Zane was determined. He would make the world will regret trying to erase him. Year 1 of the global ocean survival reached its peak. Zane had spent 4 months in a desperate, frenzied sprint for power, hunting kilometer-long leviathans, devouring their sea origin energy. He had reached the absolute peak of the abyss sovereign body. His flesh was now hard enough to rival any sea monster. He was just half a step away from awakening his fairy fruit. But time ran out. The great filter, half-population death. It was no longer a warning. It was a reality. Zane didn't wait to be erased. He stood on the deck of his level 7 advanced battleship, surrounding himself with a fortress of metal chains, imbued with sealing energy. Then, the notification flickered in his mind. You failed the judgment. His world began to crumble. He watched his hands erode into dust. It wasn't physical damage. It was a law of the universe he couldn't fight. In a final, defiant act of survival, Zane burned his very lifespan to force a breakthrough. At the brink of death, he achieved the Fairy King awakening. His wings expanded into a blinding golden light. An illusory crown appeared on his head. For a moment, he felt like he could seal the universe itself. Then, the void swallowed him. He died. Back in the real world, Zane gasped. The sensation of turning to dust was still fresh in his mind. He had failed the plot kill, but he hadn't left empty-handed. The system presented the spoils of his journey, the power of a fairy king, a fleet of mythical items, and the talents that made it all possible. 6 options stood before him. He could only take 4, options 1, 4, and 5. The power, the food, the compass. These were non-negotiable. He was only one choice away from becoming the most dangerous man. In the zombie-infested world of Terra, the golden light of the simulation faded. Zane chose his path. He bypassed the survivor authority. He chose to unlock the system inventory. It was a gamble to give his system more power, but he knew the truth. A Stage 5 Abyss sovereign body, and the power of the Fairy King of Sealing were more than enough to rule the real world. As the time stop lifted, the surge of power hit him like a tidal wave. Zane felt his muscles become denser than steel, his senses sharpened to a razor's edge. He looked at the old metal crowbar on his bed, a weapon that once felt like his only hope. He chuckled. With a flick of his wrist, heavy metal chains materialized, slithering through the air with a mind of their own. He was a god walking among ruins, but he wasn't a fool. In a world where everyone has a talent, being the tallest nail only invites the hammer. He decided to play it cool. He would hide his true fairy form as a trump card. His official talent would be simple metal manipulation. He popped open a bag of chips, unlimited food creation at its finest. He tried to relax. Then, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. It came from the campus. Zane rolled his eyes. Who's dumb enough to scream in a zombie apocalypse? The zombies outside his door scrambled toward the noise. Finally, some peace. Zane's thoughts turned to his roommates. Henry still owed him $50. That was a debt the apocalypse wasn't going to erase. He tried calling his bros. The lines were dead. He peeked through the window. The chaos was everywhere. Students being hunted like cattle, blood staining the pavement. His friends were nowhere to be seen. Zane sighed. He finished his snack. He erased the trash with a single thought. He had 7 days until his next simulation. Sitting around was getting boring. It was time to head out. It was time to clear the campus. Zane didn't consider himself a saint. He wasn't here for mass murder or abuse, but he knew the truth. In an apocalypse, a person's moral bottom line shifts as fast as the tides. Still, he was human enough to help. If the cost was low, he had to leave his dorm anyway. Clearing out a few dozen zombies was just a warm-up. He didn't use the stairs, in a move that left everyone below speechless. Zane stepped out of his 4th-story window. He plummeted toward the ground, but before he hit the pavement, heavy metal chains erupted from his back, anchoring themselves into thin air, as if the atmosphere itself were solid stone. He hovered there, a dark silhouette against the sky, silent, deadly. Below him, a group of 11 students were backed into a corner, survivors of the initial carnage. They were led by a guy named Kurt. He was desperately maintaining a shimmering barrier talent. It was a losing battle. The barrier was spiderwebbed with cracks. 40 zombies were seconds away from a feast. "Look, it's Zane Voss!" one of the girls screamed. Her voice was a mix of shock and hope. Zane was famous on campus, one of the 4 princes, known for his looks and his icy, aloof demeanor. Kurt looked up. Sweat dripped down his face. "Zane, help us! I'll pay you in supplies, a whole bag of food." Zane didn't waste breath on a reply. He simply snapped his fingers. In an instant, 42 sets of chains burst from the ground, wrapping around every single zombie like iron serpents. A second later, the chains tightened. A violent metallic screech echoed through the air. The links became razor sharp, slicing through rot and bone like wet paper. In 3 seconds, the horde was gone. Nothing but a pile of silent, butchered meat. The silence that followed was heavy. Kurt and the others stared at the carnage, then at Zane, as he descended slowly to the ground. The sheer dominance of his power was terrifying. They realized the truth. The old rules were gone. In this new world, a man like Zane was a king, and they were barely peasants. Kurt, shaking, signaled a student to bring forward the supplies. He offered the bulging bag to Zane with both hands. Zane didn't need their crackers and water. He was a god of resources. But he took the bag anyway. If he played the hero for free, these people would cling to him like leeches, sucking him dry. With a thought, the bag vanished into his system inventory. The group gasped again. Zane looked at Kurt. His icy blue eyes were indifferent to their fear. "Have you seen Henry, Damien, or Alan?" Zane finally had a lead. Kurt revealed that Alan was last seen at the computer lab. It was a clear search area. But just as he was about to depart, Kurt shared a vital discovery. The zombies carried mysterious white crystals in their brains. Zane didn't hesitate. He used his chains to harvest the loot, extracting 18 crystals from the fallen horde. Nearby, the students hovered helplessly over Jude. Their friend was rapidly succumbing to the virus. To Zane, this virus was a joke. Compared to the volatile C mutations he had sealed in the abyss, this was nothing. Without a word, he plunged a clean metal tip into her infected arm. The students watched in stunned silence, too terrified to interfere. With surgical precision, Zane activated his sealing power, vacuuming every trace of the virus out of her veins, pulling the corruption into the metal. He applied a rare healing paste from his inventory, a relic from the ocean world. Her fever vanished instantly, but as he finished, a notification rang in his mind. It sounded like a siren. Ding! Detection complete. Individual Jade Willows possesses an SSS rank innate talent. System suggestion: kill her immediately. Sacrificing an SSS rank talent will bypass the 7-day cooldown and allow an instant new simulation. Zane froze. He looked down at the girl he had just saved. In this world, power was everything. Speed was the only way to stay ahead of the next update. Killing her meant an instant return to the simulator, another chance to farm power, another chance for god-tier rewards. To the system, she was just a battery. To the students, she was a friend. Zane stood at the crossroads, cold logic against his remaining humanity. Zane was tempted by the system's cold logic, but his conscience held firm. He wasn't a saint, but he wasn't a monster either. He had no reason to slaughter a girl who had only suffered. He already possessed the Stage 5 Abyss sovereign body. He was already a fairy king. In this zombie-infested world, he was a god. If he couldn't survive with this, then humanity was doomed anyway. He finished the treatment and turned to leave. He had a computer lab to find. But Jade's voice stopped him. She didn't just ask for help. She offered a contract. "Protect me forever, and I'll use my talent on you." Zane paused. He looked at her properly for the first time. Jade Willows was breathtaking. Jade green hair, eyes to match, a figure that had half the college wrapped around her finger. But Zane had seen mermaids in the abyss. He was immune to simple charm. One thing baffled him. Why was someone with an SSS rank talent acting so desperate, the highest possible blessing? And she was begging. Zane didn't waste words. His chains lashed out. They wrapped around Jade and hoisted her into the air. He ignored the gasps of the students. He leaped toward the roof of the nearest building. Once they were alone, behind a sealed barrier that blocked all sound, Zane dropped her. "Nobody can hear us," he said. His voice was cold, direct. "Tell me your talent. Tell me why an SSS rank user needs a bodyguard. If you lie, this deal is over." Jade didn't flinch. She looked him in the eye. Her voice trembled, but she was certain. "My talent is called Innate Talent Upgrade." Zane's icy blue eyes widened. "I can take any talent and push it to SSS rank," she explained. "And if it's already SSS rank, I can push it even higher, to a rank that doesn't even exist yet. But there's a catch. I can only use it once in my entire life. And once I do, I lose my power forever. I'll be a normal, defenseless human again." Zane stood in stunned silence. He finally understood her terror. She held the ultimate key to godhood, but using it would turn her into the ultimate victim. She was offering him the chance to transcend the limits of the system. The price? He would have to become her eternal shield. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to subscribe. This way, you'll get notified as soon as a new story drops. See you in the next video.